and welcome back to my YouTube channel Mukesh Taikab. So in the continuation of the previous video series, we were understanding the Python functions. What is a Python functions? How we can define it? What is a syntax of a Python function? So far we have covered user defined functions and the built-in functions. So in this video lecture, we will going to cover Lambda functions. Okay, we will understand what all are the Lambda functions and how to define a Lambda functions and what is a scope of a Lambda functions. Okay. So according to the theory part, in Python, a Lambda function is a small anonymous function. That means it doesn't have any name. It is a way of creating a function without actually giving it a name, and it is typically used as a one-time use of function that you don't need to define explicitly, right? Lambda functions are created using the lambda keyword followed by the function's parameter, a colon, and the function's body, right? This is the definition, but as usual, without practical we can't understand what is the meaning of these lines, right? So we have to understand about the lambda functions in a practically and implementation manner, so we can get more insights about the lambda functions. All right, so now let's move on to the editor IDE. Okay, and we will see few examples implementing lambda functions. Okay, now task is, let's say the first task is implement a function to find even numbers from the list. All right, now if you already aware about the previous user defined functions, what you will do, you will using the def keyword and the function name followed by the open and closing parenthesis. Okay, in this function you will be passing a list. Okay, and inside the function body, what you will do, if after iteration you will do I remainder equals to division equals to 0, then it is a even, otherwise not even. This is 4-5 lines of code you have to write if you are using a traditional approach, right? But what lambda function says, you need not to mention explicitly a function name. All right, instead of that, what you have to do, just use a keyword lambda n number of parameters. So I'm using a parameter x colon and followed by the expression. So what is the expression? Expression that is going to evaluate whether that series is even or not. Okay, so here this is the expression, right? So here what I will do, x to equals to 0, right? This is the lambda function syntax. This is the completion of the lambda function. Let me explain it one more time. Lambda keyword, arguments, argument can be n number of arguments, but expression will be only one, right? So let me define numbers on which we will be checking the even and odd. 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so this is the numbers, a list of numbers which contains even and odd. So out of this list we have to identify which are even and which are odd, right? So this is the function. Now what we have to do, we have to apply a for loop on this list if we are using the traditional approach, using the def keyword, function name and all. All right, so as I explained in the previous video, there are few Python inbuilt function. So those functions directly we can use it. Okay, so let's say I'm using the filter function. Okay, I will explain what is the filter function, and it will requiring two things. First one is the function and second is the iterables. So let me pass the numbers. All right, the filter function takes two arguments, a lambda function and a list. The lambda function is defined using the keyword lambda followed by the input parameters x, a colon, and the expression x division equals to 2 equals to 0, which returns true if x is even and false otherwise. This filter function applies the lambda function to each element of the list and returns a new list containing only the elements for which the lambda function returns true. All right. So if it returns a list, then we have to typecast it to a list. All right. So whatever the return from this filter function, we are storing in a list. It will return as a list. Okay. And let me assign it to a variable called as even num. Let me print this even num. You can see this function returns 2, 4, 6 because these are the only even numbers. All right. So you can see here within the one line of code, your function gets completed, right? You need not to write multiple lines of code. Simply using the lambda functions, you can see the lambda function requires only one line of code to perform the operations. All right. Now coming to this one, filter. So before explaining the filter function, let me explain one more thing here. Let me copy this line and instead of filter, let me type it as map. Let me say it as even number and even number 1. All right. So first I will show you one comparison and then I will explain. Okay. You can see is filter function returns a list for a particular item. For that filter returns true. So for example, if filter returns true for 2, the first index element, if filter function returns true, then it will return that element. Map function will iterate over the entire list. It will be taking one element one by one and it will applying this lambda function on all the elements and returning true and false for that one. All right. Now let me take one more example where we will be finding the square. Okay. So let me comment this one. We will take one more example. So let me uncomment this numbers because we are using this numbers of list. Now what we have to do, we need to find a square for each element. So 1 square is 1, 2 square is 4, 3 square is 9, likewise. So just use lambda. Okay, argument, colon, and the expression, right? Expression. So for writing the expression, what is x into 2 times, because this is the square. All right. So lambda function completed now. Now we have to iterate this lambda function on all the element which numbers list contains. All right. So we have to perform iteration for this function on the every element within this list, one by one. So for that, what we have to do, just use the map function. And if you know or you are aware about the map function, it will request 2 arguments. First is the function, second is the iterable. So iterable is the numbers. All right. Now without doing anything, let me take output of this map function in a out variable. All right, and now let me print this out. You will see the output in a different manner. It says map object, right? Instead of giving the square, it's giving the map object. So now what you have to do, you have to iterate through this object and you will get one by one item. Okay, so without doing that, what I have to do, I'm just typecasting it to a list. Okay, now it will giving me to a list of a square. You can see 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. Okay, so the above line of code applies a lambda function to each element of the numbers list and returns a new list containing the squared values of each element. All right, so one more example just to make you more clear, and we will be taking more complex example in the coming videos. Now take one more example where I want to add two numbers. All right, I want to add only two numbers. So what you have to do, lambda. All right, now first colon. Now first complete the expression, then only you will understand what you have to write on the left side. After the colon, what you have to do, you have to add two numbers, x plus and y. Suppose these are the two numbers. So you have to provide two numbers to this expression, right? So if, for example, if you are defining a function and here you are taking two parameters, a and b, right? A and b, and here you are doing a plus b, right? Similar way, what you have to do, you have to pass two parameter, x comma y, or you can take any name instead of x comma y, but you have to pass two parameters. So 1 minute back I mentioned you, like, first type this colon and the expression, then only you will understand why I'm taking two parameters here. All right, now let me call this function. So what I'm doing, I'm just giving a name as add name and print add. All right, and I'm giving the two values 2, 4. All right, let me execute this program. You will see this is giving me output as 6, but if you are using a traditional approach, you have to write 4-5 lines of code, and lambda function provides a best optimized way to write Python neat and clear code. So this was about this basics of the lambda functions. So in the next video, I will be explaining more complex programs using the lambda functions. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and like my videos.